Hi, this is Matt, and welcome to the School of Fiction YouTube channel. I'm here with Keith Weber, the author of the Sean Wynne thriller series. His protagonist is a Harley-riding biker named Sean Wynne. Has been described as a cross between Jack Reacher and Easy Rider, and those are two of my favorites. Each of the three books in the series has achieved #1 bestseller status in various Amazon categories. The first two books, Not Rules and Intentional, were top 3 finalists in the 2023 and 2024 Adventure Writers Competition. Keith's books have been described as fast-paced, action-packed, and hard to put down, and I'll tell you for sure they are all of that. So today we're going to talk with Keith about the formula he uses to keep his thrillers so thrilling. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
Maybe we should start by telling our viewers about your protagonist. So just who is Sean Wynne?
Sean Wynne, as you mentioned in the intro, he's a biker. He's a former Marine. He was in, not to give too much background, but he's an Air Force brat whose father was injured in the 9/11 attacks, and that motivated him to become a Marine. And after 8 years of that, he went to college, met a gal, got married, and life was being pretty normal for him until his wife happened to be killed by a stray bullet. And he bought a Harley, and something clicked in him. He bought a Harley, went on the road, and has spent the last few years basically finding adventures on the road on his Harley.
It's a very picaresque, right?
Yes, yes.
Tell us a little bit more about the series. You have 3 books, and I'm sure that they all have a lot of different things to offer. So let's learn about them.
Yeah, sure. The first book in the series is called Night Rules. It is a story of again, Sean being out on the road, and he happens to oversee a couple of guys checking out a woman at a remote Wyoming rest stop. He just has this feeling something isn't quite right, so he follows them. And sure enough, they do abduct the woman, and he spends the rest of the book trying to, as the promo for it says, do for a stranger what he wasn't able to do for his wife, and that is save her.
Powerful motivation.
Yeah, exactly. Powerful motivation. Kind of fun on that particular story. I do spend some time, or I shouldn't say Sean spends some time in the at the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally. Not all of the book takes place there, but there are a few scenes that take place there as part of his adventure in trying to rescue this gal.
But you grew up in Sturgis, right?
I did. 17 miles away. So I was going to Sturgis well before it became, the largest biker rally in the world.
Oh, you're a biker. You got to be, right?
Yeah. Yep. I do. I've
Tell
been
us about your
riding.
bike. Tell us about your bike. Come on, come on.
Uh, I've got a Harley Sportster 1200 custom, and I have customized the heck out of that thing. Bags, fairing, stereo. When we use the word custom, I have taken that to heart with this particular bike.
Well, where did the idea come from for you to start off writing about human trafficking in your first novel with this character?
Well, it's really interesting. I live just a little bit north of Denver and have for the last 30 plus years, of course, but as I mentioned, grew up close to Sturgis. So there's a stretch of road there that I've driven probably half a dozen times a year for the last 30 years. And maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, my wife received a forwarded text message, or I'm sorry, a forwarded Facebook message from a woman who said, "Hey, someone tried to abduct me on this road." And that idea just kind of, I mean, first of all, it's frightening and chilling that that kind of thing could actually happen. But it just kind of, that idea stuck in the back of my head about that's really interesting, and how could we make a story out of that? So being a biker and enjoying riding and thinking that I wanted to create a hero who was in fact a biker. Now we've got an area that I was familiar with. It all just kind of came together from really one forwarded real Facebook post that my wife received.
Wow. I'm very excited to read this book, and I'm going to go ahead and recommend all these books, all three of these books, and I guess you have another one coming soon, right?
The third book in the series was released in late October, actually about October 31st, can't get much later. And then the next one I'm hoping to get out by the end of this year. Yes,
Great. Well, when it's ready, you're going to come back on and tell us about it, right?
definitely, definitely.
Definitely. Well, let's get to the technical aspect of this because you have a very interesting way of constructing your novels and planning them, and that's what we want to give that information to the new writers and beginning novelists. So let's say you have the basis of an idea. A lot of our viewers will be starting there, right? The
Mhm.
challenge is how do you turn that into a full-length novel? So let's start with, I wanted to explain something to begin with before I hand it off to you, which is the three-act structure. Well, I learned about this from Sid Field, who wrote about it for screenplays. And it is common with film, but it also works very nicely for novels. And what it is that you start with, say, an opening third, which is establishing all the characters and all the situations, the major conflicts. And then you move in, that's called the first act. You move into the second act, which is the bulk of the book, which is the characters working through the major character arcs, working through the conflict until they get almost up to the climax. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then finally, you have the third act, which is usually a fast-paced move toward the end. So the third act is very, very fast-paced and works through all the major conflicts and generally is the shortest of the three. So this is the
Mhm.
starting place for the film version, but you do it a little differently, Keith. So this is what I really wanted to have you on here to talk about.
Yeah. Well, when I first sat down with this idea and decided I was going to try to write this, I'll be honest, I really had no idea what I was doing. And so one of the first things I did is went to the internet and story structure and search for that. And I ran across a gentleman named Michael Haug, who has a structure that is very similar to the three-act structure, but he goes a little deeper and calls it the five key turning point story structure. And as I started reading through his description of it, all of a sudden I realized that, yeah, all the movies and books and stories that I've read, seen, whatever over the years seem to follow that structure. So while the three-act structure is great, what I found for me was that Michael Haug's five key turning point structure actually went a little deeper. It allowed me a little more depth, a little more structure, a little more context in terms of, okay, so I've got the first act. Well, what do I really need to do? And for example, how goes into, where you can take the first 10% of the book. He says that's the setup. That's where you establish normalcy and kind of set the stage for your characters and your main character at least, and kind of what is normal for them. And then somewhere between 10 and 25% of the book, you get your inciting incident. He calls it a new opportunity. I think the inciting incident is a term that a lot of people will hear and recognize. So, that happens between
From
the 10
from
and
from Shakespeare.
25%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's where you learn that usually. Mhm.
Yeah. So, how goes through and, really kind of tells you at what point in the story should you be doing certain things? Again, 10%, 25%, what happens at the 50% mark and what do you need around there? Um, so again, he follows the three-act structure, but with a little more detail and a little more structure in terms of exactly what you should be doing at these different times. Now, I took that, and it's kind of funny. As I started learning more and more about um, writing and the process of writing, I added something that I think is controversial. From what I understand, a lot of editors don't like prologues. I start all my books with a prologue. And the reason for that is again, I'm in that action adventure suspense thriller genre. And, my feeling, just my feeling, could be right, could be wrong, but my feeling is that, that action adventure, suspense thriller, it needs something strong to open with. You need to grab the reader right away. And so the prologues that I write are typically fairly short, typically very action intense. Something is absolutely going to be happening there. And whatever that is, it's going to be a precursor or a premonition almost, if you will, of what the main character is going to be facing down the road. So, I know that there are some prologues in other genres that do a lot of world building and can go on forever. I think that's what the editors tend not to like. Maybe they don't like the way I do it either, but I found that it works for me.
I like the idea of starting with an action set piece. It works very well in film. I think it would work very well in novels too. There
Yep.
is a tendency of people to write prologues that are sort of static. And for me, in my writing, I do want to launch in immediately with the conflict. I mean, on page one, here's the character, here's the character's problem. Even if it's not the problem of the whole book, I want to start immediately with some kind of activity, some kind of challenge that reveals my character. So I think you're very much on the right track with that.
Yep.
That's the type of prologue editors don't like is not the type of prologue you're writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
All right, so this is pretty good. I'm going to assume that you're not that rigid on the percentages, right? Just kind of guidelines.
Yeah, very much guidelines. I mean, you can't, my novels tend to be around 85,000 words. So, I mean, if I get to 10% at 8,000, if it takes me 9,000 to set up, if I can do it in 3,000, get to set up, I'll do that. I think it just really depends. And in fact, with the three novels that I have, the second one, for example, I do the prologue and boom, I give the inciting incident is within the first couple of sentences of chapter one. So, kind of like you jumping right into it on that particular book.
Yeah. Let's take a look at your website. And this is, if I move that out of the way there, this is KeithJWeber.com.
Yep.
This is Night Rules, and there's Sean. And we have No Godless Past and Intentional.
Yep.
So I'm going to leave this up for a little bit, and I certainly would be interested to know how you got the recommendations from these reviews from Jeff Edwards and Dirk Kussler, if that's an interesting story to tell. But before I ask you that, your genre is described to me as hard-boiled action. So do you agree with that terminology?
Interesting. I'm not sure what that means.
Uh,
I think what it means, and I don't know that I necessarily agree that my books are this way. To me, hard-boiled action is, boy, every chapter has got something going on in it. It's got an action sequence. And it's kind of funny because very recently I was watching a Netflix series, and I would absolutely call that particular series hard-boiled action because it, even within a 45-minute episode, they probably have 5 or 6 different action scenes and action things going on there. And the problem that I have with that is that it just feels there's no space to breathe. It's the action is coming so fast, so furious that you can't breathe. And I will tell you that my approach is I'd like to build up a little more suspense. I'd like first off, I think the reader needs to breathe a little bit. You can have action, 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 but eventually you need to pause and allow the reader to catch their breath. And so, and I think there's a perfect opportunity to build suspense in those periods of less action, if you will. The other thing that I think is important is, I wanted Sean Wynne to be smart. I didn't want him to just be, bowling through everything. And again, boy, any of us could only hope that we would ever have the success or the name recognition of a Jack Reacher. And I love Jack Reacher, the only criticism I have of Jack Reacher is that he solves everything with a hammer. Every problem is a nail, and he's the hammer. I thought about that very specifically when I created the Sean Wynn character, and I thought, no, I want him to use his brains once in a while as well. And so I've created him in such a way that I hope he comes off as a smart. One of the reviewers that I have on Amazon called him a clever badass. And I thought that was perfect. I thought that was just a perfect description of what I was going for in creating the Sean Wynn character.
I keep reading this one here. The understated hero, skillful, tough, and ruthlessly determined. And that sounds great to me. Is there a story behind the interactions that got you these recommendations from Jeff Edwards and Dirk Kussler?
There is. So as you read in my introduction, at one point I was introduced to the Adventure Writers competition, and Dirk Kussler, who, for those who may not know, is the son of Clive Cussler. Clive being a slightly better well-known name, but I mean, Dirk, obviously a New York Times #1 best-selling author in his own right, and an extraordinary author. He is the final judge of the Adventure Writers competition. And so for the last couple of years, I've entered Night Rules and Intentional into those competitions where both Jeff Edwards is a preliminary judge, if you will. They have a field of anywhere between 15 and 20 judges who kind of at first round go through and select the top 10. Then those same judges select the top 3. And then, the top 3 are given to Dirk Kussler for Dirk to select the ultimate winner. And so it was by entering my novels into that Adventure Writers competition that Jeff and Dirk have read my first 2 books and provided these reviews.
I'm so glad you got the opportunity to do that, and so excellent. So let's go back and talk just a little bit more about this plot structure, and kind of, if you could just briefly run us through the 5 stages that you
Sure.
the prologue and then the 5 stages.
Yeah. So again, the first stage is really the setup, as we talked about a moment ago, and then the inciting incident, which is the new situation or the new opportunity that Howard talks about. That happens somewhere between the 10 and 25% of the novel range. Between 25 and 50%, we're just looking to make progress. And Howard calls that inciting incident really the turning point, where something happens, that there's a change of plans for your hero, your main character, the protagonist, whatever you want to call them. So there's that change of plans. And again, then between the 25 and 50% mark, you're looking at your protagonist making progress towards solving whatever conflict or issue has arisen. But then you get to this next turning point, which to me is really important. He calls it the point of no return. And for me, what I wanted to do as a point of no return, and I have something like this in all 3 of my novels, is some large event. You can have your inciting event, but again, I'll say that in one of my stories, the inciting event is no more than my protagonist receiving a letter. Well, not too much exciting about that other than what the letter says, of course. But as the story progresses, we've got to get to a point where something big happens. Again, Howard calls it the point of no return. I look at it as saying this is kind of the fake summit, if you will. Putting mountain climber terms into it here. You've got the ultimate summit, the climax. This is kind of that fake summit where something really big happens, creates a point of no return, and now your protagonist is 100% all in. They can't do, They have no choice now but to see this thing through. So you continue from that point of no return, continue to build for a while until you get to about the 75% mark in the story. And that's where your protagonist needs to face some kind of a major setback. Something needs to happen that is almost uh, the all hope is lost moment, if you will. Um, and again, there's nothing new. There's nothing unique that I'm saying about this. This is kind of formula structure out there. The only thing I think that I've done slightly different here is trying to make that point of no return again almost a false summit. You could almost view that as a climax in the middle of the book, because I really want that one to be big so that the reader is absolutely sucked in the rest of the way. Again, so around 75%, you hit your major setback, and then of course the rest of the book, as you said, is the climax and the resolution, solving, or in some cases not solving completely whatever the issue is. The last 5-10% of the book is just going to be wrapping up the subplots and that kind of thing.
I'm just going to add a little point of context here. The all hope is lost moment. That
Mhm.
terminology, I think, is from Save the Cat, which I'm going to be covering in a future video.
Perfect.
It's the a formula that was invented for Hollywood screenplays that is now being used in novels as well.
Hmm.
So I think these are all coming from sort of a common place of writers figuring out what works,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
and then from that point on, you find your own way to do it.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
Well, and to maybe go just a little left on the conversation here, one of the questions that I get asked a lot, just last week, as a matter of fact, the whole pantsing versus plotting debate. Do you pants it? Do you plot it? What I have found works for me is that if I know what these major plot points are, and if I know, what these 5 key turning points are, it's, call that plotting if you want, but to me, it allows a lot of freedom in between then, to take, little sidebars here and there, to get to that plot point. And so I do tend to do a lot of just writing on the fly, a lot of pantsing, if you will, knowing where I eventually want to end up. To me, that's been the best way. I've tried it completely pantsing. I've tried it completely plotting. That way in the middle is what works for me.
I think for me too, I would agree. I do a little bit less plot planning now than I used to,
Hmm.
but I can't pants completely either, because at some point I'd be like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing here. So what I like to do is know what the major points are and then just let ideas develop over time. It's partly because for me, my creative process involves things like thinking while I'm driving.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I'll play my playlist. I'll think about the current project, and ideas come into my mind when songs play, and then I got to figure out a way to put them in. So that's where I agree. You have your big outline, and then you pants the stuff in between. So
Yep.
take advantage of the fact that as you think, you'll get more good ideas. Yeah,
Absolutely.
we align perfectly on this, Keith, I think.
Good.
And
Good.
that's a great place, I think, for us to stop until the next time when I'm going to invite you back.
I appreciate
Talk about
that. Thank
another
you.
topic. Yeah, this has been a real pleasure. And I do have one probably a relevant question. Are you using a standing desk right now?
I am. Yes.
I had a feeling because I'm having trouble staying framed here and sitting in this in my poor old gaming chair here. But on the standing desk, you're like, oh, so I said I need to get one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're cheap on Amazon.
yeah, excellent. All right, Keith, thank you so much for coming on. Like I say, you're welcome back anytime. Just let me know when you have a new topic you want to talk about, and we're gonna move forward with this one. And uh,
Perfect.
and if you have questions for Keith or for me about this topic, please put them in the comments below. I will answer the ones that are for me, and I'll pass the ones that are for Keith on to him, and we'll get it worked out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the time.